The Shepnaz podcast begins now.
You're listening to the Shepnaz podcast, a podcast at Shepherd Church. Everything we do here is help people take their next step toward Jesus. This podcast is part of it. We want to help you engage daily in spiritual development. We are in the midst of our 21 days of prayer. We've been looking at David Earley's book, The 21 Most Effective Prayers of the Bible. And today is day 19. And it is the prayer of the disciples, and it says to increase our faith. I want to read Luke 17, 3-5. Here it is. Jesus said, "So watch yourselves. If your brother sins, rebuke him. And if he repents, forgive him. If he sins against you 7 times in a day, and 7 times comes back to you and says, 'I repent,' then forgive him." The apostle said to the Lord, "Increase our faith." Today, I am joined by the producer extraordinaire, Joe. Uh-oh. We have flipped the camera around so that you can see him in his workspace, his little workshop here. So Joe's here. We're going to talk about this prayer of the disciples to increase our faith, specifically, obviously, when we're talking about forgiveness of others. So Joe, welcome in, man.
Hey, I was thinking about this before. Like, people might not realize we're almost always in the room together.
Oh yeah,
but we never appear together.
Yeah. You and you guys have probably seen Joe a little bit more recently, just because of the way we did the 21 days. He was in and out of the episodes just because of the way we shot them. But now our focus is on Joe, and he's such a spotlight guy. Yeah. He loves it. He loves it so much. Right. So let's talk about increase our faith. We're getting toward the end, and that's a great one. Just before we get into it, you may have noticed if you've been following this diligently, then you'll notice that we have skipped a couple of days here and there because of weekends, because this is a weekday podcast, and so. Like for instance, day 6 and 7, we didn't do on the podcast, but don't fear, because I know that you were really worried about it. We're gonna hit all the 6 podcasts that we're missing from the weekend days. We're gonna put them in on the next week. So though the 21 days will be over, you'll still get that content if you're looking for it. So don't throw the book away just yet. But,
so that means you can actually pray after 21 days.
Yeah. You can. Right. You don't have to wait till August when we do the next 21 days. Yeah. Okay, Joe, let's talk about this. We're in Luke 17. The disciples, Jesus is telling them that they need to forgive people, even if it's 7 times a day. That was weird. And they say, okay, but then we're going to need some more faith if we're going to do that.
Yeah. I mean, I guess my first takeaway when I was reading through the chapter and reading through this passage, and in full transparency, like several of the prayers that Dave Earley has picked out, I was like, is that really a prayer? There's...
Well, yeah. So technically they're speaking to God, right. Jesus. So technically, yeah, I hear what you're saying.
But I mean, so it did allow me to just kind of question for a second, what constitutes a prayer?
Yeah.
And, but as I was going back through the chapters, there's a couple of those that the prayer that we've been looking at and the prayer that we're kind of modeling after isn't necessarily what we think
it's more so like a mutter under their breath, like, oh, help us.
right.
Increase our faith.
I mean, I don't think that at this moment when he was telling them that you're going to need to forgive up, and if it's 7 times a day, so be it. In fact, if it's even more than that, so be it. Mm-hmm. I don't think that, at that moment they felt conviction, sat down and started praying.
Do you think that they thought it was a prayer?
Well, that's I kind of was questioning that.
Yeah, that's interesting.
But at the same time, like, it did bring to mind that, like, God, we're in this relationship with God 24/7.
Yeah.
And so when we're talking to him, that's all prayer is.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes we formalize it too much. And we're like, prayer is only when I'm sitting down in the quiet place and bowing my head and closing my eyes, or I'm by my bed, or, I'm sitting by my end table with my Bible. That's my quote prayer time. And but here, we see how prayer is so casual. It's like it's just a response to God. It's talking to God. And now you kind of raised the question: did they even realize it was a prayer? I don't know the answer to that.
Interesting.
But I was thinking in those terms, and it got me to thinking more about like what was prayer life like for a disciple? Like, you're with Jesus, but then just a couple days ago, we had a devotional on the Lord's Prayer, and they specifically were asking, like, teach us how to pray. So we know that like they were praying regularly, and they wanted to do it right. And then also they're seeing Jesus model this prayer life in front of them, where so many times he would be like, I'm going up a hill. I'm going to go by myself. I'm going to go pray. I'm going out on a boat by myself. I'm going to be on the lake and I'm praying. Or even, the night of his betrayal out in Gethsemane, praying all night long. And
And I wonder if what the reason maybe they asked Jesus, hey, we need you to teach us to pray, because maybe Jesus rebukes the religious leaders in a few different times because of how they prayed. The disciples see how the Pharisees pray, and then they see how Jesus prays, and they're like, I want to do it the way Jesus does it. Yeah. Will you teach us how to pray like you pray? Because we know you don't like the way the Pharisees pray, and we don't necessarily like the way the Pharisees pray. So would you teach us how to pray like you? And so maybe they're learning that this prayer thing isn't like what we knew when we were kids, or I mean, most of them are still pretty young at this point, but like when they saw Pharisees and church and religious leaders in the temple, they're like, that doesn't seem like what you're telling us prayer is.
Well, right. And I think, it makes sense that they would think that way. Yeah. Because their whole heritage, their whole culture, everything that they've learned. I mean, you think of them, the reverence and the high esteem that they had for just being able to enter the temple and knowing that only the high priest one time a year could go into the Holy of Holies to be in the presence of God. Like prayer life where you could just say, increase our faith. That's totally new to them.
Yeah, that's good.
So that was my first takeaway was, wow, like that's a prayer. And the fact that what the disciples' prayer life would look like, as far as they were probably, as you were saying, trying to figure out how Jesus was doing it. Like, let's start doing it that way. I guess for me, the next part was I was looking in the context by which they were saying increase my faith, and that also struck me a little weird. Because, maybe they made a connection there that,
it's not necessarily written how they got to that point.
Right. But I need to get, I think I need to dive a little more into that myself.
Yeah.
Where they're realizing that in order for me to be able to forgive the way you're asking me to forgive, I'm going to need more faith to be able to do that. And like, I don't know that I really have thought about faith in those terms. I typically think of faith as like, I believe God can do something, or I believe that this impossible circumstance can be overcome because I have faith. I don't know that I had put the pieces together that an increase in my faith could sharpen me spiritually in other areas of my spiritual life. So like an increase in my faith might help my ability to forgive, or maybe an increase in my faith might help my ability to be kind, to be merciful to people, that actually increasing my faith would result in those other attributes.
Yeah.
So that was kind of new to me. And it's kind of also odd that when they're praying for God to increase the faith, that Jesus, most of the time when he's talking about faith in, while he was walking the earth, he's criticizing the little faith that people have. Mm-hmm. And like in the book, Dave Earley gives numerous examples of, like, he was saying, you have little faith here, you have little faith there, you have little faith here. And so maybe that's what was prompting them.
They realize now that, this isn't about what we do, it's about having faith. Because up to this point in the Jewish culture, it was about what they did, right? It was about obedience to the law, and the law had the last word. But now they're like, it has nothing to do with us. We just need more faith. If we're going to do it, everything Jesus says, he says it takes more faith. So I guess this also will take more faith.
Right.
So,
and I think maybe that's how they made the connection.
Very well could be.
Was that everything that they were seeing? He was like, yeah, you're going to, whether like when they were sent out to heal, and there were. There was a certain demon that they couldn't cast out, and they wanted to know, why couldn't we do it? And you're like, need more faith. Mm-hmm. And so then they started maybe to see that the answer to all of their shortcomings spiritually was a lack of faith. Mm-hmm. And so maybe when they're seeing that, I don't know if I'm going to be able to forgive the way you're asking me to forgive, that I'm obviously going to need more faith in order to be able to pull that off. January 21st is the last day of the 21-day prayer challenge. To celebrate, we'll get together that evening in the sanctuary at Gahanna campus for music, praise, and worship. Come and celebrate with us Sunday evening, January 21st at 6 p.m. Childcare is available. That was encouraging to me in realizing that we can ask for that. I know, like, one of Rob's favorite books for the past year or so has been Ephesians.
Yeah, man.
Literally fell out of his Bible because he used it so much, but it's put back together now. But in Ephesians 2, I was going to read this verse real quick. Ephesians 2:8, for it is by grace you are saved through faith, and this is not from yourselves. It is a gift of God, not by works, so that no one can boast. And that got me to thinking that the faith that we have is not our own. Yeah. We didn't like make that faith happen. And that there's, I feel like I need to personally spend some time just hanging on that thought a little bit, that I think we have a tendency to like personalize our faith, and we even do it to the people around us, like, oh, that person, they have great faith, and or God, I don't have enough faith. And we think that it's just something that we possess in ourselves, and there is some truth there. I mean, there is a certain amount of faith that each person has, but no matter how much or how little you have, that's been given to you by God. The person that you see that has great faith, it's not because they got great faith on their own.
Sure.
And so I hope that can be an encouragement to people today that feel like, I'm low man on the totem pole. I don't have a lot of faith. Well, the people that you see around you that you think have a lot of faith, and probably do, it wasn't something that they got on their own. It was something that God gave them. And, we see here the disciples asking for it. So then that leads to the question, okay, so how does God do it? How does he increase the faith? And we might think that as you're reading that passage, like it almost seems that Jesus was kind of dismissive of the request. And in fact, Dave Early talks about that a little bit, where he's saying, when they said, give us more faith, and then Jesus just goes right into, well, if you even have just a little bit of faith, you can tell the mulberry tree to move and it'll move. You can tell mountains to move and they'll move. So it might at first seem like it's a little dismissive in Jesus' response, that here they are asking for faith. And he's like, if you have just a little bit of faith, you can do all this stuff. And we may not realize that it's not necessarily an overnight thing where, like, if I said, Jesus, I want $1,000 in my bank account, and it's either there or it's not, that when I pray, increase my faith, it's going to be a process. And so how does he do that? And one of the areas that I've looked at is the way Jesus or the Spirit grows anything in our life. And oftentimes that's through the experiences that we go through. Most recently, my mom has had like a lot of struggles with her vision, and she's got advanced glaucoma, and she had just recently a procedure in what is her good eye, where she had a gel stent put in, and she's dealing with the healing process, and her vision is getting better. But I mean, for the first couple of weeks, she could not see at all, and I'm sure that's very scary for her. It was very scary for us because, like, we were not expecting that. You know, she's had procedures on her eyes before, and never before did it just result in her being blind afterwards. And so she's got a lot of great spiritual friends around her, and one of them said, "Well, I'm going to be praying that the Lord will just give you patience to deal with this." And she goes, "No, please don't pray for patience.
Pray for healing." I just want to, I don't want to be patient about it.
Because my mom has a very active prayer life, and like she recognizes that, well, if you're praying for me to have patience, then God's just going to let this go on to grow my patience. Yeah. Now, I don't know if it works exactly like that, but I think that we definitely see this then in the disciples' life later on, where they were saying, "Lord, increase our faith." And, we see after Jesus returns to heaven, it's throughout the book of Acts, these same men that like were questioning whether or not they could even forgive somebody, are healing the sick, bringing the dead to life, making the blind see, the lame walk. I mean, there was just miracle after miracle that these seemingly impossible things were happening through these men who just maybe a year before said, I don't even know if I have enough in me to forgive someone when they wrong me.
Yeah, man. So when do you know that is that kind of when you know that the prayer's answered, that you begin to move into that next phase of faith?
Well, I think what happens is you have to take a look back, and I think it's, we're not to dwell in the past. Obviously, I'm not suggesting that we contemplate our failures, but what we should be looking at is how God has been consistent in our lives, and He's taking us from where we were to closer to where He wants us to be. And so I think that it is a gradual process. I think that you want to take a spiritual inventory and say, hey, especially at this time of year, we're at the beginning of the new year. It's like, how am I on a spiritual scale? Am I a better Christian January 2024 than I was January 2023? Yeah. And if the answer is no, well, then I think you'd start with this prayer and say, increase my faith. And then you realize that these things that I'm facing in life, the struggles that I'm going through, that the promise we have in Scripture, that He is using those things for our good. And He's using those things to build our faith. And so I think that's how you see it, is by, looking back at what He's done. And you can also help others see that. I mean, it's not always about just our own spiritual life, but you may have people around you that are struggling with where they are spiritually. And you can encourage them and say, hey, I remember when this was a struggle for you, and that's not a struggle for you anymore.
That's good.
And so you're much farther along than what you think you are. And to encourage our brother and sister in Christ in that way, I think would be a great next step.
And so if you were to give some encouragement to say, man, here's how to pray this prayer, here's what it could do for you, here's what it's done for me, what would you say as we kind of wrap this up?
I would say that this prayer can be applied to a lot of different parts of your spiritual life.
Yeah.
That when you're saying, increase my faith, that you can also be looking at the other spiritual fruits that we should have manifest in our life, whether it's patience, kindness, goodness, self-control, all those things. We can be praying for different parts. It's not always just asking God to do something for us. It's not always asking God to do something for someone else, or asking God, what job do you want me to do, or what decision do you want me to make? We should take time in our prayer life to be asking God to, hey, can you make me more like I should be? Can you help change the person that I am to be the person that you want me to be?
Sure. It's good. All right. Well, that's going to wrap up our episode today. Don't forget that next week we're going to continue with these chapters. They're going to come a little out of order. They're going to be the weekend chapters that we didn't get to on the podcast. But we want to see you on Sunday for a worship evening where we're going to worship together. We're going to pray together. We're going to celebrate all that God has done through these 21 days and look forward to what He's going to continue to do as we continue to pray throughout 2024. My thanks to Joe for coming on and sharing this devotion with us. We're excited about what all God's doing. We hope to hear from you soon. Thanks for listening. Have a great day.
This podcast is a production of the Shepherd Church of the Nazarene, Gahanna, Ohio. Email to podcast@shepnaz.org and let us know what you think.